Doctor, going back to your evaluation of Mr. Jonchuck, did you, in your evaluation, ask him some questions, some identifying characteristics about himself?
Yes.
All right, did you ask him how old he was?
Yes.
And how old was he at the time of the evaluation?
At the time, he was 27 years old.
And did you ask him how tall he was and how much he weighed?
I said that he was 6'2" and 165 pounds.
Indicate that how much he used to weigh?
Said he used to weigh between 200 and 220 pounds.
Also, as part of your evaluation, do you get any type of background or family history regarding the defendant?
Yes.
Mr. Jonchuck, was he able to tell you what his father's name was?
Yes.
And what was that?
It was Jonchuck Sr.
How about his stepmother?
Her name was Michelle Jonchuck, but she went by Mickey.
All right. And so in the course of your evaluation, how did you differentiate Michelle Jonchuck, the stepmother, versus Michelle Jonchuck, the biological mother?
I refer to her as Mickey Jonchuck.
Mickey is the stepmom, Michelle being the biological mother?
Correct.
All right. And did you identify his daughter's name?
Peter.
As part of your evaluation, do you also get a brief medical history from Mr. Jonchuck?
Yes.
Anything remarkable as far as his medical history?
Yes.
What was that?
Well, he reported that in 2011 he herniated a couple of discs in his back when he fell at the Cheesecake Factory. He had a spinal cord stimulator implanted in his back in 2013. He also reported having a history of seizures beginning when he was either 23 or 24.
Now, after developing all
Sleeping. Their thinking can be distractible. They can have racing thoughts, one thought on top of the other, and that is displayed by having pressured speech, that they talk one thought after the other, sometimes not even pausing between sentences. They can also get involved with certain activities almost to an obsessive level, such as religion. And they can also get involved with reckless behaviors. A symptom which is often seen is they overspending on their credit cards, money that they don't have. They can get involved in foolish investments or foolish business schemes. On the other side, they can get into depressive episodes where they feel depressed, they feel sad, they feel hopeless, helpless. They have problems with sleep, concentration, appetite, and to the extreme, they'll have suicidal ideation. They'll think about committing suicide. That's the bipolar part. Psychotic features is a whole nother set of symptoms.
And did you prepare any materials to aid the jury in your testimony today?
Yes.
Did you prepare any materials to aid the jury today in your explanation of psychotic symptoms and psychotic features?
Yes.
Judge, if I may approach the witness?
Sure.
Is this what you prepared?
Yes.
It would help the jury understand your testimony today.
Yes.
Would you like to see this before
No. Is that a demonstrative
I
exhibit?
demonstrative exhibit, Judge?
Any objections?
There you go. Doctor, I'm going to set this up so the jury can see it. If you need to move in order to explain it, please do.
Yeah, so that there are a number of symptoms related to psychosis. One of the symptoms is a delusion. A delusion is a false belief, an irrational false belief, that no matter what evidence you show to that person to try to prove to them that this belief is not true, they still will hold on to that belief. An example is a paranoid delusion. An example of a paranoid delusion might be that somebody thinks that the CIA or the FBI have put microphones in their head and are tracking them and following them. And you can show them x-rays and MRIs of their brain, of their head, and show them there's no microphones in their head, but they'll hold on to that there are microphones in their head and that they are being tracked by the CIA and the FBI. So that's one symptom of psychosis.
That's delusions?
That's delusions.
What are hallucinations?
Hallucinations come in many different forms. Usually it's auditory and visual hallucinations. Auditory hallucinations is hearing voices when nobody's speaking. It's seeing things that nobody else can see. It can also include olfactory hallucinations, which are smelling things when there's nothing to smell. Or somatic hallucinations, feeling things when there's nothing on them.
You also have on here disorganized thinking. What's that?
Disorganized thinking it's a continuum. It can start off where an individual is distracted. Then it can be that they lose their train of thought. And it can go to the extreme where their thinking is irrational. It's nonsensical. And the thing you can't see thinking, so the way that we look at disorganized thinking is that through behaviors, through speech, through writings. And through speech, individuals will be circumstantial or tangential. Circumstantial is where they kind of veer off the topic of conversation. Tangential is going from topic to topic to topic. And then as the psychosis gets worse, the speech is irrational and can become incoherent, so you don't even understand what they're saying. And the same is true for disorganized writing. You'll see you'll see that type of symptom in the writings as well.
What is grossly disorganized behavior?
Grossly disorganized behavior is behavior, first of all, that can be impulsive. It can be where an individual is acting but without purpose. And then to the extreme level, they're acting in an irrational, bizarre type of manner.
And then lastly, you have negative symptoms. What are those?
The negative symptoms, there's a number of different symptoms that relate to negative symptoms, but most common is having no expression, where in most circumstances, individuals will have expressions. If they're angry, they'll show an angry expression. If they're happy, they'll show a happy expression. But for the individual experiencing a psychosis, no matter what they may be feeling, it's flat, no expression whatsoever.
What is a flat affect or flat affect?
No expression. No, that's what a flat affect is.
All right, so can you give, let me just ask you, what's a blank stare?
That can also be part of a flat affect.
Okay.
No expression on one's face.
Okay, and those are examples of negative symptoms.
That would be in the category of negative symptoms.
All right. Now, doctor, let me ask you a question. Jumping back for a second to the family history, did you look into the background of Michelle Jonchuck?
I asked John about his mother.
Did you find any evidence that Michelle Jonchuck suffered from a mental illness?
He reported that she had a history of bipolar disorder.
Did you also review any other records from the DCF?
Yes.
Okay. Mental illness, wait, what did he tell you she had?
Bipolar disorder.
That's the same thing he has?
That's what I diagnosed him with at the time of the offense.
Is mental illness, is there a does it run in families?
Certain disorders do. Bipolar disorder and schizophrenia, psychotic types of disorders are genetically linked. You see it runs in families.
Doctor, we went through some of the records, some of the things that you reviewed. Did you rely on those to form your diagnosis in this case?
Yes.
Did you summarize those in a PowerPoint presentation?
A great deal of it is on PowerPoint presentation, yes.
Would that aid the jury in understanding your testimony?
I believe so.
Judge, may you step down? Now, in developing this PowerPoint, did you have a theory or a plan as to how to present this? In other words, is it presented in chapters, chronological?
It's mainly presented in chronological order.
So in presenting this, in compiling this PowerPoint, you were attempting to bring to the jury things that you think are important in explaining your diagnosis and your opinion?
Yes.
What is the first thing you felt was important? Clickers never work.
Please repeat the question.
What was the first thing that you noticed chronologically that you felt was important to document in your diagnosis and your opinion?
Well, that at the age of either 5 or 6, records indicated that John was diagnosed with ADHD. That stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder, the main symptoms related to that disorder are inattention, hyperactivity, impulsivity. And the disorder was so severe, he was prescribed medications at that time.
Now, and you said prescribed medications. Does that mean he obviously went to a physician or a medical doctor, correct?
He reported that he went to USF and was prescribed by medications by a doctor there.
What is the next thing you thought that was important?
The next was that at the age of 12, he was receiving mental health treatment. So he was receiving mental health treatment from 5 to 6 to 12, and there's indications that he was also receiving treatment in between that as well.
Doctor, just to focus on this the screen here for a second. Obviously, that's you, right?
Yes.
What is this right here?
It's the year as well as his age at the time.
All right. And then along the bottom here, what do we have?
We have the chronological timeline.
Okay. All right, so at the age of 12, he's already receiving mental health treatment?
He's receiving mental health treatment beginning 5 or 6, but he continued to receive mental health treatment at the age of 12.
Were you ever able to determine who provided that treatment?
No.
Were you ever able to determine if there was a diagnosis way back then?
No, it seemed the ADHD, ADD was a running diagnosis in his childhood years.
And then, a few years later, what were you able to determine?
Well, at the age of 16, he was Baker acted to Morton Plant Hospital, the Child Adolescent Psychiatric Unit. And to understand what a Baker Act is when a person is involuntarily psychiatrically hospitalized. It can be done by a mental health professional, it can be done by a police officer, but the determination is made that they are at risk to harm themselves or to harm others. They can be experiencing psychotic disorders, hallucinations, delusions, but unless they are deemed to be a risk to themselves or others, that's the criteria one looks at when doing a Baker Act.
So, we're we've heard the term Baker Act before. We've heard the term involuntary committed, but can you break it down? I mean, what's it mean to be involuntarily committed?
Well, it's when you're put into a psychiatric hospital without your consent. You are deemed to be a risk to yourself or others, and so you are forced into that psychiatric hospital.
You are held there.
You are held there.
Not free to leave.
Not free to leave until you're evaluated and determined that you're not a risk to yourself or others.
And during this time period, was there a diagnosis?
He was diagnosed with major depression and prescribed the medication. So major depression, I spoke about that a little bit before, where somebody is feeling depressed, sad, hopeless, helpless, and possibly feeling suicidal at the time. And they can have problems with sleep, appetite, concentration. Those are all symptoms of a major depression.
Doctor, I use the term depressed just in normal conversation. Is there a difference between the common usage of the word depressed or depression and the clinical or medical term major depression?
Well, I think that you're looking at the distinction between sadness and depression. We all feel sad at times. There's things in our lives that happen to us that we feel sad about. What the major depression is about is that these symptoms related to this sadness and all these other symptoms interfere with functioning. A person is not able to function because of these feelings that they're experiencing.
Do you treat sadness with medications?
Usually not.
So then this prescribed medications, this again means that a physician, a medical doctor, determined that he was in need of medicine?
Yes.
What else can you tell us about that age?
Well, while he was at Martin Plant, they did some interviews with family members. They interviewed his stepmother, Nikki Jonchuck, and she reported that John has a long history of mental health issues and is on medication. So there's the indication that he wasn't just treated at 5 and 6 and then 12 and then 16, but this is mental health issues which have been ongoing. His father reported the same. He reported that John has a long history of mental health problems, including ADHD, ADD, as well as having unspecified behavioral problems, acting out types of problems, and that he had been taking medication through the years.
Is there a difference between ADHD and ADD?
The difference is ADD is attention deficit disorder. It doesn't have the hyperactivity component to it. It's not, that's the distinction. So it really doesn't make sense to have both ADHD and ADD.
So if you've got this one, you automatically have this one?
Yes.
And so then what you're telling me is that at the age of 16, his stepmother and his father had said at 16, he's already had a long history of mental health problems?
Yes.
What's the next thing you noticed that was important to you?
We jump to age 21. He began seeing a psychiatrist, Dr. Gary Arthur. A psychiatrist is a medical doctor with specialized training in mental disorders.
And were you able to review Dr. Arthur's notes?
Yes.
Okay. Did you see anything in Dr. Arthur's notes? Well, let's go this way. What did Dr. Arthur do for him?
Well, Dr. Arthur diagnosed him with, well, he noted some of the history. He took, it appears he took some history from Mr. Jonchuck and noted that John was first diagnosed at USF, that he was diagnosed with ADD, attention deficit disorder, and he was prescribed Ritalin, which is a common medication for ADHD and ADD.
What else did you learn from Dr. Arthur's report?
He also described that John at the time was having manic episodes, and in particular he saw John as having difficulties with irritability and having anger problems.
Now, you mentioned that bipolar used to be called manic
Depression.
So these reports are from back in 2011. Is this manic episodes, is that an indication of manic depression?
Or bipolar disorder, either one.
Okay, so in other words, we don't know whether Dr. Arthur had, we just switched the name for the same symptoms from...
Well, with bipolar disorder, there's still manic episodes that a person experiences. They have to have manic episodes to have bipolar disorder, and they can also have depressive episodes. So it's still the same term that is used.
Okay, so these manic episodes, do we see the introduction at any point in time here from Dr. Arthur of any medications?
Yes. Well, in addition to having manic episodes, he also saw that John was having severe panic attacks. Panic attacks are an anxiety disorder where somebody will have episodes in which they will have heart palpitations, they will become very shaky, they will start sweating. They'll have paresthesias, which is like tingling in the fingers and toes. They will have chest pain so severe that they think that they're having a heart attack. Those are some of the symptoms that an individual will have while they're having panic attacks. And he diagnosed John, again, age 21, with bipolar disorder, panic disorder, and ADHD.
All right, and these were all from Dr. Arthur back in 2011.
Correct.
Did you review some more of Dr. Arthur's records?
In order to treat these disorders, he prescribed him Abilify, and he noted that the Abilify was to help with the mood swings that John was experiencing. He also prescribed Adderall, which was is a medication to treat ADHD or ADD, and that was noted to try to help him with his studying at the time.
Now, are you getting all this information from just one piece of paper, or reviewing all of the reports from Dr. Arthur that you were given?
I was able to review all of Dr. Arthur's progress notes in his treatment of Mr. Jonchuck.
So when you say you were reviewing progress notes, are you walking us through Dr. Arthur's reports from the beginning to later?
I'm not highlighting every single note. I'm highlighting specific notes which give a real flavor as to the types of issues that Mr. Jonchuck was experiencing at the age of between 21 and 23.
Okay, keep going if you would, please.
This was a note from January 23rd, 2012. He indicated that John is having problems with anger episodes, but he also noted that John is having issues with paranoia at this time. He's having problems with agitation. He's blowing up at people and throwing things. So we see issues of mania, manic episodes, as well now paranoia. Paranoia would go under the psychotic symptoms of delusions.
So at this point then, we're seeing signs of delusions?
Yes. Well, yes. He was prescribed Seroquel, which is a medication which is commonly used to treat bipolar disorder as well as psychotic disorders. Zoloft, which is a medication often used to treat depression, as well as Ambien, which is a medication to help with sleep. And if you recall, part of a manic episode is having problems with sleep.
This one, Seroquel, is he still on that?
I believe so.
Thank you.
The next note that is highlighted is from December 2012 when he was 23 years old. Some of the symptoms that Dr. Arthur noted was that John was experiencing somatic hallucinations. So now he's experiencing hallucinations where he's feeling his skin bubbling, but there's no evidence that his skin is actually bubbling. He quoted John as saying, "I'm losing it."
Hold on. Who quoted, what was that?
That was Dr. Arthur quoting John.
Okay, so John told Dr. Arthur, I'm losing it?
Yes.
Okay.
He also noted that John had seen Dr. Bora at the Florida Community Hospital, who indicated that John was totally disabled.
Did Dr. Arthur communicate what Dr. Bora, I mean, I know we have an opinion of totally disabled, but did he say why or what it was?
Dr. Bora's evaluation related to seizure activity.
Okay.
And Dr. Arthur diagnosed John at that time with having bipolar and possible partial seizures. And Dr. Arthur's own evaluation of John at the time is that John was really totally disabled.
So now we're still reviewing more of Dr. Arthur's reports?
Yes. And this is in March 13th of 2013.
So now we're moving down along this timeline here?
Correct.
All right.
And what he indicated was that John wanted to work, but he can't do it. He can't concentrate. And he's also having problems with anger and irritability. He's continuing on the Seroquel, which is the medication for bipolar disorder and psychotic symptoms. And he also prescribed him Xanax, which is a medication most often used to treat anxiety. Dr. Arthur noted that John's affect, his facial expression was depressed and anxious, and he was down on himself, meaning he was self-deprecating. He was speaking negatively about himself. Dr. Arthur wrote that John is disabled. He seems to be able to get a job, but he can't hold on to it due to his psychological problems.
Now this area here, couldn't concentrate. How is that an example of disorganized thinking, or is it just moving toward disorganized thinking?
It could be a number of things. It can be moving towards disorganized thinking. It can also be part of his depression. A symptom of depression is problems with concentration. So it can't make that determination at this point.
So we can't check this box yet.
No.
What else did you learn from that?
He also summarized in this note that it's been 3 years now, at least, that John has been experiencing bipolar disorder and anxiety disorder and attention deficit disorder.
So this isn't just something that happened over the last couple months.
No. This note is from September of 2013. And Dr. Arthur noted that John has had more seizures and in fact went to Florida Hospital because of the seizure activity. And what John reported was that he was thinking that he was having seizures because they were being brought on by stress.
All right, and that last one was, you said, when was that, September of?
That was March of 2013.
March in 2013, all right, and then now we're moved on to September and November 2013. No, September and November 2014.
2014, so we're jumping approximately a year.
All right, and so we're still continuing on our timeline going this way,
Correct.
All right, what do we know at this point?
Okay, in September of 2014, John reported in my evaluation with him that he started to hear voices. He was hearing voices telling him that he was bad and that he was going to hell. It's noted that at this time, too, he had a prescription for Seroquel. Seroquel is, again, the medication for bipolar disorder and psychotic symptoms. And he tried to get it filled at Walgreens, but they didn't fill it because the prescription had expired by that time. And from the note that I reviewed, I guess they contacted Dr. Arthur, but Dr. Arthur noted that John was no longer a patient of his, so did not authorize the refill of that medication. So September, he doesn't have his medications. He starts to hear voices.
And you already told us about a somatic hallucination, and now we have
This would be an auditory hallucination.
auditory hallucination. So now we have two here, right?
What he also said was he had a little bit of the medication left, so what he tried to do is to ration it out, break it in half, take it not every day, but the medications are prescribed to take at the full dose each and every time that it's prescribed for, so breaking it in half, he's not getting the full therapeutic dose that he was prescribed. So whether he's taking a half or none at all, he's not getting the medication that he needs to treat the symptoms that he's experiencing. So he started expressing a belief that he was going to hell. Again, this is what the voices were telling him.
Now, is that another delusion?
It went along with the auditory hallucination. Yes, it would be a
Okay.
delusion as well.
All right. Now I see Thanksgiving, Christmas, 2014. I see nothing on the board. Okay.
During this time between Thanksgiving and Christmas, it was noted that John and Michelle's relationships seemed to be more amicable. It seemed to be more friendly. They had Thanksgiving dinner together, him, Phoebe, Michelle Kerr, as well as her boyfriend Guy. And it seemed to go well. As the time period went by, Michelle saw Phoebe a little bit more, and they actually had Christmas dinner together. It was indicated that John was not drinking or drugging at the Christmas. And after the Christmas dinner, he thanked Michelle and Guy for having them over for Christmas.
So does this mean that he's all better?
It doesn't mean that at all. It just means that in looking at the relationship itself between John and Michelle, there was not the indications of animosity during this particular time period.
So is his, or are mental illnesses, are they exaggerated by stress?
Yes.
Is this a period where it's stressful or less stressful?
Well, we're not getting a full picture of what he was like at that time, he was experiencing at the time. I mean, what he reported to me was during this whole period of time, he is hearing voices. They're not overwhelming to him. He's still able to function to a degree. He's still having an amicable relationship. But it doesn't mean that he's not experiencing symptoms of psychosis or symptoms of bipolar during this time.
But is there something that happens around this time too that's noteworthy? That you noted in your PowerPoint? On the next one?
During, and this is an indication that he's still experiencing psychotic symptoms, that during Christmas dinner, at one point John goes outside. Guy Kisser, Michelle's boyfriend, goes outside as well. And what Guy Kisser reports is that he saw John talking to himself. And this was something that John reported that he had been doing more of during this period of time, that he was talking more to himself.
Okay, but this slide right here, this part of the slide right here, John talking to himself, that report comes from who?
Guy Kisser.
All right, and that's Guy Kisser telling you what he saw?
Yes.
Right.
Well, not telling me. It was in his deposition.
Okay.
And individuals talking to themselves, that is a possible indicator that they're experiencing auditory hallucinations and responding back to those voices that they're hearing.
All right, you have here December 29th, 2014 at 3:42 a.m. John's 25 years old. What's the significance of this slide?
What happened was John went to the emergency department of St. Joseph's Hospital, and it appears that he was having a panic attack. He was reporting having heart palpitations. He was feeling like his heart was racing. He reported feeling jittery over the last several weeks. So as I noted in the last slide, even though he was having more of an amicable and more friendly relationship with Michelle, he's still experiencing symptoms of anxiety and possibly hallucinations and delusions as well. And what would happen in this instance is that he woke up in the middle of the night feeling extremely anxious. He was evaluated by the staff at St. Joseph's Hospital, and the conclusion was that he was not having a heart attack, that the symptoms were being brought on by anxiety.
A heart attack, is that a mental illness?
No.
Okay. Is anxiety an indication of mental illness?
Anxiety, if it's interfering with functioning, which it was for John, is a mental illness.
Okay, so he goes to the hospital thinking he's having a heart attack.
Yes. He was just reporting problems. He didn't report that I'm having a heart attack. He reported I'm having all these types of symptoms.
Okay, he reports he's having problems with his heart,
Yes,
and they tell him it's not your heart,
it's anxiety.
it's his mind.
Yes.
Right. Sorry, keep going.
He also noted in my evaluation with him that at this point, the voices start changing a little bit. The voices start changing from he's bad and he's going to hell to they're getting louder and they're starting to indicate that he's possessed and Phoebe is possessed. A couple of days later, he files a petition for injunction for protection against domestic violence without children.
Right. Petition for protection against domestic violence without children?
Yes.
He has children though, right?
Yes, the petition itself didn't make sense because he even had Phoebe's name on the petition. Yet there's two different forms. There's one form with children and there's another form without children. And he filled out the form without children, even though, number one, he has a child, and number two, he even put her name right on the petition.
What did this cause you?
Well, it was, first of all, we're talking about the disorganized thinking and behavior at this time where even though he's looking to put in this petition, he's got it wrong. And the petition itself was very disorganized as well. Although if you look at the content of the petition, he raises concerns about there being a lack of food in the home for Phoebe. He reported that Michelle Kerr was under the influence when she was around Phoebe, that she was using alcohol and or drugs. And that Michelle's boyfriend, Guy Kisser, had been arrested for domestic violence against Michelle, and there is documentation to show that there were incidents of domestic violence between Guy Kisser and Michelle. He also reported that there were weapons and ammunition in the home, in Michelle Kerr's home.
And so at this point now, we're starting to see the disorganized thinking.
Yes.
And we had somatic, we had auditory, and then you're saying we have more auditory hallucinations at this point as well?
Yes. And they're getting louder.
So the check mark's getting bigger.
It was also around this time, well, interviews were done with several family members after Phoebe's death. And they asked the family members about John's behavior in the days, in the weeks prior to Phoebe's death. And some of the statements that were made, Jonchuck Sr., his father, reported that John was putting salt around the house for weeks to keep out evil spirits. He said that his son said that Phoebe was possessed. He noted that John was speaking a lot about God. He was becoming more religiously preoccupied. And this was odd because John had never been very religious before. So for him all of a sudden to be preoccupied, religiously preoccupied, was very odd. And the mind of his father. He also started carrying around the Bible and sleeping with the Bible. What John told to me about the Bible was that he had asked for this big Swedish brown Bible from his stepmother. It's early January. And as soon as he got this Bible, he heard a knocking coming from the Bible, which he didn't know what that was about. That would be an auditory hallucination.
And how about the keeping out evil spirits? Is that a delusion?
Yes, that would be like a paranoid delusion, that evil spirits were coming after him.
And how about Phoebe being possessed? Is that a
Same,
delusion?
paranoid delusions. He also told me that he would keep this Bible with him all the time. And the reason that he kept the Bible with him all the time was he felt that it would ward off the demons. So he would sleep with it. He would carry it with him wherever he went. And as I noted before, he said that John Jr. wasn't very religious before this time. And what was also noted was that he did not see John using alcohol or drugs during this time either.
And this information was provided to you by John's father, John Sr.?
It wasn't provided to me, it was provided to law enforcement.
Okay.
His stepmother reported around this time that he told her that he was the Pope, that Phoebe was possessed by demons, and that he had been pouring sea salt on the outside of the doors to keep the demons from entering the residence and Phoebe's bedroom. And this was something that was noted by the police after Phoebe's death, too. So we have, going back to the chart, telling John that he's the Pope is called a grandiose delusion, thinking he is some amazing figure. This is way beyond an inflated self-esteem. He thinks he's a Pope. This is a grandiose delusion. We have, again, the possession of demons, which is a paranoid delusion, and along with that, taking steps to ward off the demons that he believes that are after him or in him and Phoebe.
Doctor, I've heard a term mood congruent and mood incongruent. Am I correct in those? Those are medical terms?
Well, it's in the DSM-5. It's a specifier for when you diagnose bipolar disorder with psychotic features. When you diagnose with psychotic features, it can be mood congruent or mood incongruent features. A mood congruent feature would be like a grandiose delusion. So we're talking about a manic episode. An individual has issues with grandiosity, with feeling an inflated self-esteem. So that would be a delusion which sort of goes along with a symptom of bipolar disorder. A paranoid delusion is more of a mood incongruent feature because it's not a typical characteristic that one sees when somebody is experiencing a bipolar disorder. It's not related to like a grandiosity, is what you see more with bipolar disorder. And the way that the DSM-5 works is that they have both mood congruent and mood incongruent psychotic features. You diagnose them with the mood incongruent features. So they also had contact with his biological mother. And what she reported to law enforcement was that in December, John was throwing up and having heart palpitations. So this kind of corroborates that he's experiencing increased stress during December, as we saw in the hospital record where he was experiencing symptoms of a panic disorder, having a heart palpitations. The anxiety is so bad that he's throwing up.
This December that you're talking about now, and this heart palpitations, this corresponds to that time he went to the hospital in the middle of
It's
the night?
along the same time, yes.
Okay, same month.
Same month, yes. And then in January, she reported that in January that John believed her apartment had Chinese drywall, and that he said the walls were turning black. The thing is that she looked at the walls and they were not turning back. This would be a visual hallucination. He thought that this black Chinese drywall was doing something to Phoebe, that it was making her eyes look funny. And he said that Phoebe was possessed. And she looked at her eyes and didn't see anything wrong with her eyes at the time. And she noted that John had not been taking his medications at this time.
So John told Michelle Jonchuck that Phoebe was possessed.
Yes.
And that's not the only person he had told that to, correct?
No. They also spoke, law enforcement also spoke with Nomi Bresnahan, and she reported that John was texting her about praying, about reading the Bible, and he also about putting sea salt around the house. So he also communicated with her about this religious preoccupation that he has, this religiosity that he was experiencing, and also the steps that he was taking to try to protect him as well as Phoebe. And then we get to January 2nd, 2015. He wrote his attorney, Genevieve Torres, in order to start working on the case. Because at this point, there was greater animosity between Michelle Kerr and John, and they had been each looking to seek custody of Phoebe. And so what he writes here, and maybe a little difficult to read, thanks, we really need to do the non-removal because after doing visitation up there, I had concerns and called CPI, and Michelle said that she passed her drug test and was going to file false report and try to get the retraining order, one for me and one for Phoebe, and it got denied and was recommended I do that by the investigator. They had knives and live ammos, and she looked under the influence, and the guy she is with verbally scolded her harshly in front of me and has been arrested for DV on her twice at the 2118 Delightful Drive, Ruskin, Florida 33570. His name is funny, but it's real guy Kisser. Is there anyone at your office to sign a retainer? I told Michelle I was going to when you got back, and she stopped harassing us, but this is serious, Missy. And if you recall, you can't know exactly, we can't see disordered thinking. We can only see it through the way somebody speaks or somebody writes. And this seems to be sort of pressured speech, is just one word after the other with many, many different ideas. There's one stop in this whole email. Disorganized is an indication of disorganized thinking, disorganized speaking, disorganized writing.
Now, do we see evidence of tangential and circumstantial?
It would be more circumstantial. It's kind of stays on track. It goes a little bit off, but it doesn't go to overt topic to a totally different topic to a totally different topic. It would be more circumstantial.
And it is evidence of disorganized thinking?
Thinking and writing. January 3rd, his uncle, Brian Morris, starts getting texts from John. it was indicated that they had not had contact for quite some time, I believe a year or two. And so sort of out of the blue, his Uncle Brian is getting text messages. And they say a lot as far as John's mind frame at the time, his mental state at the time. John writes, "Can you all meet me at my mom's? There is Chinese drywall stuff and food that is canned, has been spoiled, and that is still good for 2 years. I think it has been making her and the baby sick." And he sent a photo of an empty bowl. "I started pulling out to dry and get her organized in the pantries, and that is what was found, and the canned fruits have been smelling like rotten eggs." So there's a number of things in these texts. There is the corroboration of that he's experiencing these visual hallucinations, this Chinese drywall, this delusion that he's having. And now there's indications that he's having olfactory types of hallucinations. He's smelling things, rotten eggs. He's indicating that it's making her and the baby sick. Sending a photo of an empty bowl, not really sure what that's about. That can very much be a disorganized behavior. There's also not a cohesiveness to the thoughts that he's expressing. Brian, Mr. Morris writes back, "Who is he?" He doesn't even know who's writing these text messages. And John says, "This is Johnny. She is really concerned, uncles." He continues, Brian writes back, "It will be a while before we can come. We have a plumber here fixing a faucet and a guy on the way about buying the koi." "Okay, no problemo. I knew something was fishy here. LOL. Thank you very much." So we go from being very, very concerned about Chinese drywall, about his mother and Phoebe getting sick. This was causing a great deal of anxiety. A couple of texts further down, it's LOL. If it wasn't writing, if he was talking, this would be called inappropriate laughter. But what we have is the text message. It's inappropriate. It's not congruent. You have disorganized behavior. It doesn't fit. He continues, "We have found from the neighbors that they never pulled permits either, and when sitting down, using the lightheaded, and my nose started bleeding, and Phoebe only has shown signs of panic attacks, here waking up wailing." Now we're sort of going from topic, now we're getting into tangential thinking. We're going from topic to topic. There is no train or straight train of thought. His thinking is grossly disorganized, and that is reflected in his writing. The next day, he writes additional text messages to his uncle. He writes, "Please don't give up on me. I understand that everyone was trying to show me tough love, and I am almost ready. What it's like to be normal again, if only I had listened to you guys years ago, I probably would be a doctor by now, LOL. Just wanted to say I love you all. Just got home from work. Hope all is well and you have a wonderful evening. Every day I am one step closer. I fell like $1,000,000. Thank you for everything. I want to share my story soon." There's a lot in here as well. In this line of text messages, it's almost that he's euphoric. He's very cheerful. He's optimistic. He's upbeat. In comparison to one day before, where he's very, very fearful and anxious about Chinese drywall, poisonous food, people getting sick. It's a very big mood swing from the day before. He also talks about LOL. Again, we have disorganized behavior. It's not clear what he's laughing about, but it's certainly a big, big change from the day before. The next day he writes some more text messages to Brian Morris. He writes, "Doug is my father. I found the key to unlock my gift, and I'm going to do everything I can to get him out of there. I forgive you all." These text messages indicate very, very disorganized thinking. And as well as certain delusions. I asked him about these text messages. I said, "What did you mean, Doug is my father?" And he said, "The only person I can think of in my life is a Doug Kelsey, who's a cousin, a maternal cousin of his." And he said, "I don't know why I would write that." I asked him about the line, "I found the key to unlock my gift." And what he said what that was about was his gift was his ability to read minds, which would be a delusion.
Two delusions?
Well, one is just disorganized thinking.
Oh, this one?
Yes, that the ability to read minds would be a delusion. And I'm going to do everything I can to get him out of there. He didn't know what he meant when he wrote that, or what he meant when he wrote, "I forgive you all." The same day, well, I guess, not sure when the text messages were from Brian to Brian Morris that day, but also that day he wrote to Tasha Clare. The same day he's writing about Doug is my father, and I've found the key to my gift. I found the key to unlock my gift. He also wrote his friend Tasha Clare.
What time does he write her?
This is at 12:41 a.m.
So, well, most people would consider the middle of the night?
Most people. And I'm not going to read this whole email to you, but basically what it's about, there's some running themes to it. It's, first of all, he's apologizing for bad behaviors that he has shown them in the past. He thanks them for their friendship and their support. And he also talks about how he's getting on with his life. He's moving forward in his life. So we went from very bizarre types of text messages to now a very coherent, almost, message. If it wasn't for the change in moods, this would be a great email.
All right, so let me ask you a question. I've got this piece of paper here, which is the same as your PowerPoint. This email we know is from 12:41 a.m. on January 5th. Now, we don't have a time for the text messages between John and Brian Morris, correct?
If you give me a second, I can find that.
But we have a date, don't we?
Yes.
So in any event, no matter what time they are, the same day he's writing this is also the same day he's saying, "Doug is my father"?
Yes.
Same day he's saying, "I found the key to unlock my gift,
Yes.
and I am going to do everything I can to get him out of there." Same day he writes both, all this information.
Yes. And also the same day, this is about 2 hours and 20 minutes later, he wakes up his mother, Michelle Jonchuck. And he makes some bizarre statements to her.
Okay, let me stop you because we didn't introduce. 2 hours, this is at 3 a.m. John and Michelle the other one, we knew the time was 12:41, that was John to Tasha, or Tasha?
Tasha, yes.
Okay, so that when you say 2 hours later, this is what happens 2 hours after the email to Tasha.
Yes. He said to her that he was her mother, his mother's mother. And he said he, being her mother, did not molest her, his mother, that it was actually her father and grandfather who molested her. This is 3 o'clock in the morning. She sounds asleep, and John is saying these things to her. He then called her a piece of shit, and that he was tired of her keeping Phoebe away from him. I believe he said something like, "I'm going to fuck up your life." And he took Phoebe from the apartment that morning, and he went to his father's. So, in going back to that last slide, the idea that he has these statements that he is her mother, I would put under a category of delusions.
Not sure I've been keeping up with everyone.
The next day, he goes to see attorney Genevieve Torres to discuss the issues with regards to Phoebe. I was able to interview and speak with attorney Torres. She described John as being excitable, loud, effeminate, hyper, and laughing a lot. These are all symptoms that would be characteristic of somebody in a manic episode. He was seeking sole custody of Phoebe. She did not see any indications of drug or alcohol influence. And so they were able to have a coherent conversation about getting the custody of Phoebe. Although she did notice that he seemed to be loud, hyper, showing those symptoms. On January 6th as well, he had contact with Melody Dishman, which was a childhood friend of his.
How do you know about this?
There were indications in police reports, and I recently was able to read a deposition in which she talked about her contacts with John around this time. And what she reported was that
Hold on a second.